How do you define personal style?
The cliche way to define it is that personal style is how you communicate who you are before you have to say a word. I truly believe that every person is creative. I think that we all have a point of view, and I think that personal style is the culmination of that. Like, we talk about personal style as it comes to clothes, but it's also interior design. It's your communication. It's how you write. It's how you speak. It's how you walk. It's how you have friendships. It's how you relate to your family. It is the essence of you expressed in the world.
Welcome to the GenX Shift podcast, a show for Gen Xers who are navigating some pretty tough transitions and aren't sure how to move forward. I'm your host, Michele Walter, proud Gen Xer, former lawyer turned entrepreneur, huge Jason Momoa fan, and margarita snob. And I've navigated a lot of transitions in my life, from losing my mom suddenly to a heart attack to starting my own business. But I often did it all on my own because I was too stubborn to ask for help. Now I'm on a mission to give actionable strategies to other Gen Xers so that they can find the confidence, courage, and clarity they need to make a shift. So let's rock and roll. Hey Gen X, welcome back to the show. This week I am having a different kind of conversation, and one that is really important for all of us Gen Xers who are noticing that we're wanting or needing to make some type of shift in our physical appearance, in our personal style, in what we wear. As a Gen Xer, I have always had a pretty laid back style. Even when I was wearing cute little mini skirts and high heels as an attorney, I still wanted to embrace more of a laid back style. And now that I'm no longer an attorney, I definitely have embraced the laid back, casual, comfortable, I don't really give a shit what other people think of me kind of style. And as we've gotten older, as our bodies start to change, both in how much we weigh, what our shape is, our physical fitness, and as we go through different transitions in life, like maybe entering into different careers, for those of us who've had children, whatever transition you have been going through in terms of your physicality or your career or just your identity, your personal style turns out to be really important. So I was really excited and surprised when I met Holly Chayes, who is a personal style coach and consultant. Now, when I met Holly, she blew me away. The way she talks about personal style got me, as somebody who just wants to wear jeans or yoga pants and a t-shirt and tennis shoes or sandals most of the time, got me excited to think about personal style, which, by the way, isn't about fashion. Personal style is really about how you feel on the inside and what you're saying to the rest of the world by what you're wearing without even saying a word. In this conversation, Holly and I get into what personal style really means for you. And she walks us through how you can embrace your authentic personal style and be brave enough to wear it. Now, I want to say I recorded this episode in my closet because Holly actually has a free guidebook, which I'm putting in the show notes, that is called Holly's Tiny Book of Style. And it takes us through a 3-step process for how she gets you to embrace and learn what your personal style is. So we didn't clean out my closet. That wasn't the point. But I wanted to use my closet kind of as an example of what's going on in my life, maybe pull out a few things that Holly and I could talk about. And this conversation was so fun and empowering for me to really start to think about how you can approach cleaning out your closet in a way that, as Holly explains, allows you to embrace your maybe. It's not about just getting in there and getting rid of everything, because as we talk about, there can be some things that you're not quite sure whether you want to hang on to or not. And she has some brilliant recommendations for things that are maybe a little more sentimental that you want to hang on to and what you can actually do with those. But one of the coolest things that I think we get into in this conversation is the grief around our clothing. When you have those skinny jeans that you just really want to fit back into and you're determined to fit back into, I have those up in my closet. Or maybe there's some piece of clothing that you wore for something special, and so it has a lot of sentimental value. We want to recognize that clothing can involve some grief. It can involve a change in our identities. And so we really want to learn how to grieve those identity shifts that our clothing represents. I hope that you enjoy this conversation, and I really hope you watch it on video because it's kind of cool to see in my what I call my friend's Monica style closet, which is kind of a disaster. So sit back and enjoy this conversation with Holly. Make sure to check out the show notes, and I'll see you on the other side. Hey, Holly, welcome to my closet.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited for people to get to experience the joy and the wisdom and the awesomeness that is you. And I'm going to get into how we know each other. But before we do that, I want you to introduce yourself with your tagline, because I think your tagline is brilliant and I want folks to hear that.
Thank you. So I'm Holly Chayes. I'm a personal stylist and consultant. And I help people with their everyday genuine style and really cementing it into their daily lives so that they can wear it even when they're running late, fighting a cold, and it's laundry day.
I love that. Running late, fighting a cold, and it's laundry day. Because
Exactly.
that's the world that we live in. And I wanted to do for listeners who aren't watching the video, I really invite you to go back and watch the video for this one, because we're sitting in my closet. And I wanted to do this episode from my closet because there might be some things that I want to pull out. And I think that as we get into this conversation, we start to talk about our mental and emotional relationship to clothing and to our personal style. And I think this situation behind me says a lot about what can be going on internally sometimes. And I might want to pull out some things to sort of get your take on how could I zhuzh this up to make it comfortable for me and also something that I could wear out or to a keynote speech or something like that. So we'll get into all of that, but that's why I am sitting in my cluster of a closet, which feels like for people who watched Friends. Did you watch Friends, Holly?
I haven't. I have
Okay.
not.
Yeah. And I'm gonna reveal something to our listeners here in a second about Holly and about why she may not have watched Friends. But there's an episode of Friends where Monica, who everybody knows is like the neat freak, the clean freak. I'm not like that. I'm fairly neat, but I have my messy moments. But there's an episode where they find her secret closet, which is where she shoves all the crap. And they open the door and it just comes like spewing out.
Everything just tumbles out.
Yes, that's what this is. Like I have a pretty good size walk-in closet. I'll kind of try and pan this around a little bit so folks can see the full situation of what's going on here. We have like these are I'll show later. Like these are some of my dresses, like cute dresses that I still wear. And then behind me on my left over here are all the suits, all the attorney crap that I will never wear. And we're going to talk about that. And then I have like, these are sort of normal clothes over here. And then all this stuff, this is what I usually wear, t-shirts. So I have like 3 piles of short sleeve t-shirts, 1 pile of long sleeve t-shirts, a pile that is just Chicago Cubs t-shirts. And then I have like, I hope this will spin around without unplugging over here. Like all the workout crap is over here. Plus what you can't see are, if I can tilt this up a little bit, racks above me with purses that I do not use, sweaters, like it's a mess. So you aren't here to clean out my closet. We're not going to clean out my closet today, but we are going to talk about how I can better manage some of this stuff to really find that personal style, which for Gen Xers especially, and for any generation, as we age, our bodies change, our tastes change, our jobs change. And so how do we transition into clothing, into that sense of personal style that feels like us? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So the big reveal that I want folks to hear is that, Holly, you're not a Gen Xer.
I'm not.
You are thoroughly a millennial, as
Yes, I am a very thorough millennial.
And we're giving you an honorary Gen X hall pass for today
Thank you.
because we met through an online networking group by the amazing Sarah Gita Flores, who I'm also going to have on the podcast. And she was doing, I forget what it was called. Was it Find Your Inner Goddess Voice or something like that?
Or it's her book launch party.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that was it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because she's
Yeah.
amazing. She
Yeah.
helps women, excuse me, really find their inner voice. And so we met in that group and we went into a breakout room together and got to have a conversation. And I thought, okay, I know you're probably not Gen X. I got about 20 years on you. And you have such an old soul. Like there's this just old soul wisdom about you. And once I learned what you did, I thought, oh, I have to have you come talk to people of my generation. And so, yes, you are a millennial. And what I really kind of hope to do with this podcast, even though I'm going to be interviewing a lot of Gen Xers, but I'm also going to have millennials, some Gen Z, maybe boomers, because at the end of the day, these generational labels are all kind of made up, right? And
Mhm.
all the generations like to give the other generations a hard time. And I really think that Gen X is like a bridge between the boomers and the millennials and the Gen Z. And I think that we all have something that we can learn from each other. And so I hope that folks today will get a lot out of your experience and the insights that you have about finding our personal style. So before we get into how you work with people, I want to have you tell us a little bit of your story and your background, because I think no matter what generation we grew up in, the decades that formed our childhood years, I think, can be very influential on our adult lives and the paths that we take. So tell me a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and sort of what your childhood experience was like.
Yeah, I was born in the early 90s and I grew up a little bit outside of New York City. So I had a very 90s childhood, but it was not very steeped in pop culture. We did not have like TV, we didn't have cable, we didn't really listen to like radio. I was very early in the internet, but not like steeped in early 2000s teenage pop culture. And I find it so interesting that those decades are coming back.
Yeah.
I do. I'm like, oh, and how it's almost as though what's coming back is the TV show style and the movie style of the 2000s, but and 90s, but not like the reality of the 2000s and 90s.
We can leave that back there. Yeah.
Exactly. And so my background professionally is in costume design for theater. And so I often think about real life versus what we portray and how we portray ourselves. And that was always what I loved about costume design. And it was always what I loved about, like history and people and psychology and culture growing up. I always was very interested in how people portrayed themselves and how we show who we are through what we wear and how we behave. It's much deeper than a very surface level. It's really about presentation and presence and how we portray ourselves throughout our whole lives, which is what got me into costume design, which is what ultimately brought me to personal style, because that through line is consistent, whether you're talking about individuals living their lives or characters in a play.
I think the costume designing phase of your life is fascinating. I've never met a costume designer. And so just tell us a little bit about how you got into costume designing and what that world was like.
Yeah, so like I said, I grew up a little bit outside of New York City, and we would go into New York to see Broadway shows every now and then. And that's part of what really got me interested in the theater aspect. But before that, the My Fair Lady VHS tapes had like a 15-minute segment at the very end after all of the credits that was all about the production. And that's really when I fell in love with the mechanics of film and television and theater and how to create this world that we see on screen. And of course, they spent a huge amount of that time talking about the costumes, because the costumes in that movie are so monumental, and it's really all about her transformation. And a lot of that is shown via dress and these huge ensemble scenes. And how do you get everybody dressed up for a horse race or a ball or whatever? So that's really kind of the heart of where it all started.
So I'm really curious, when becoming a costume designer and immersing
Sure.
yourself in that world, how do you learn the psychology that
Mm.
was behind the time periods, behind the costumes, behind the character? Because I find that fascinating. So how did you begin to understand the psychology that was going into the costumes?
Yeah, so costume design, you really start with the script and with the director's vision of what the show will be. So you dive into like what is actually happening, what is happening with the characters, what do they need to do, how do they need to present themselves. Then you work in collaboration with the actors, the other designers, and of course the director to build a world and to try and really get into the minds of who these people are and how to bring them to life. And from kind of the basis of all of that is a ton of research. So like there are some costume designers that focus on specific time periods just because they can get so much knowledge about that particular time period or era. But it's really a process of discovery and collaboration.
Did you find that when you were able to help design a costume for a character that an actor is going to be wearing, could you see if and when the actor was really connecting with that costume and that role? Is that something you could actually experience?
Yeah, it's magical. There are times and there are actors who they feel like they can't really understand the character until they get into the costume. And you
Yeah.
can see oftentimes it's a physical transformation. It's obviously a visual transformation because they're wearing new clothes now, but there's also a very energetic transformation that happens. And I was working on a show and helping the designer, and it was, it was an opera, and I don't remember what it was, but somehow we ended up needing to make a custom suit for a character. And it was made by a tailor who does the amazing tailor, who would not make an incorrect suit. And they knew what they were doing. Did not screw up the suit. But every time the actor wore it in rehearsal, it never looked right. And they kept tweaking it and adjusting it and changing it and doing more fittings and doing more fittings. And eventually the designer was like, can you be in character in the fitting? And the actor could, and so they did. And their posture, they shrunk like multiple inches. They slumped forward, they shrunked, they looked small. And this was like a tall guy with like broad shoulders. And that's why the suit wasn't fitting. Because when the actor is being the actor, shoulders are back, head is up, looking tall, looking grand. If you fit a suit to that person, it's not going to fit the character who's slumped over and feeling bad and feeling small. And so they fixed the suit and it was all great. But there is something so physical about clothes that alter our sense of self in such a profound way that I really like, I learned how powerful clothing can be through costume design. And it was like stories like that of seeing very accomplished actors who have done this hundreds of times become somebody entirely new with new clothes.
I think that's fascinating and
Yeah.
makes complete sense when you hear it. But in that moment, to have not understood, well, why isn't this costume fitting this actor
Mm-hmm.
when this tailor is amazing?
Yeah.
And then to
Yeah.
have that light bulb moment of, oh, when they're actually in the character,
Yes.
their
Yeah.
whole physicality, demeanor
Mm-hmm.
changes.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think it's such a great example of us to bringing it back to us non celebrity people, who aren't doing plays or TV shows or movies.
Yeah.
That same still holds true. The
Absolutely.
circumstances of our life, kind of the characters that we're playing in life, as well
Mm-hmm.
as the costumes that we are literally having to wear every day, they really impact our persona. So I want to get into that, but how did you make that transition from costume design into personal style?
Yeah. It happened kind of via, like, by way of realizing that as much as I love costume design, as much as I love theater and film and television and like that world, it's not where I wanted my career to go. So I was like looking ahead multiple decades and like what the career path is. And I realized that it's not what I wanted to do ultimately. And it's not the career I wanted to have as much as I loved what I was doing. So I took a couple detours through. I was working with creative businesses and really helping them with their marketing operations, helping hone creativity into a business structure. So I've done that a little bit, and that helped give me the space to figure out what I loved about costume design and realize that I could do that with individuals as well.
Yeah, what a cool
Yeah.
realization. I'm kind of curious when you like looking back on your childhood now and when you grew up in the 90s and even not being plugged into pop culture, which by the way, I think is a good thing. Do you remember when you were growing up, did you really notice that creative energy that you have? Because you're clearly, at least I think, a very creative person. Did you feel that you really could tap into that creative energy? And do you remember thinking like, was this something that you thought you might do, or did you have completely different vision when you were growing up of what you might be doing?
Yeah, I don't remember what I wanted to do for a career like prior to high school. Again, growing up in kind of the radius of New York City, I knew people who worked and had careers in theater and on Broadway, and I'm so fortunate that I did have those role models and those examples and those knowledge that you could make a career out of creativity. Because I think it's a narrative that we say a lot, is that you can't make a career out of your creativity, but
Yeah.
we also consume so much media that's all creative driven.
Right.
Um, yeah, so I was a very creative child, and I loved that my parents encouraged that. And I had people in my community who I could look to and be like, this is possible to do.
Yeah, I just really appreciate that perspective because I'll speak for myself. I know this isn't all Gen Xers experience, but it's a pretty common one that especially since I grew up in a very small rural Nebraska town, it wasn't outside of New York City. So that cultural experience in and of
Yeah,
itself was different.
yeah.
But I remember the people who I went to school with who were more of the creative types. So they were more artistic. They did more theater or singing, plays, whatever it might be. They were always the ones that people often made fun of and certainly were not encouraged to pursue a lot of that creativity. And as somebody who also felt fairly creative in terms of writing and art, that wasn't something that I feel like was ever really fostered in me. And I don't think it was intentional by my parents not to foster that. I just don't think it was on their generation's radar. So it sort of didn't get passed on to our generation's radar. And consequently, I spent most of my life having the creativity beat out of me essentially by being a
Mm.
lawyer. So
Mm.
I really appreciate that. I think there's a shift in that that's happening slowly, where I hope that a lot of the younger generations and that we're getting the messaging across to them that absolutely embrace your creativity. Even for older farts like me, like let's embrace our creativity because it shows up in a lot of different ways. So tell me, let's get into the personal style, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
fascinating things that I know that you can talk about. And let's start with telling me, how do you define personal style?
Yeah. Ah, so good.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but start
Yeah.
with the foundation of what we're talking about when we talk about
Yeah.
personal style.
Yeah, the kind of the cliche way is to define it is that personal style is how you communicate who you are before you have to say a word.
Mm, I'm just letting that sink in for a
Yeah.
minute. Yeah. Okay. I have some thoughts
Yeah.
on that, but go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I love creative style and personal style, and I truly believe that every person is creative, kind of tying back into whether or not that creativity is encouraged. That's a separate issue. But I think that we all can express ourselves. I think that we all have a point of view. And I think that personal style is the culmination of that. Like we talk about personal style as it comes to clothes, but it's also interior design, it's your communication, it's how you write, it's how you speak, it's how you walk, it's how you have friendships, it's how you relate to your family. It is the essence of you expressed in the world.
I really appreciate that definition, because what was coming to me as I heard you say that is nothing in there was about how the world perceives you, right? It was all
Mm-hmm.
coming from the wearer's,
Yeah.
the individual's perspective of how do I want to present to the world before I even say a word. I love that,
Yeah,
because for better or worse, that's sort of how we size people up, right? When we first see them, is
absolutely.
what they're wearing. And even
Yeah.
oftentimes, like, what shoes are they wearing? What purse are they carrying? And there's a lot of disadvantages and downsides and toxicity to that for sure. So I love your definition of putting it on the individual for how do I want to express what's inside. That's what I hear in there, to the outside world. And our
Yeah.
clothing is just an expression of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always start there as the beginning, because even if you need to modulate how you present, because you're a lawyer who works for the federal government and you have to present a certain way and wear all of these suits, and if even if that's true, you can still have your personal style in you. And you can go to your closet and say, I am currently in a position where I cannot express myself the way I would want to express myself, but I can still acknowledge my self expression to me,
Mm.
and then decide how to play the game that you have to play in what you
Mm-hmm.
wear.
That really hit me because, for a couple of reasons, looking back on my lawyer career, there were a number of reasons why I never felt like a lawyer.
Yeah.
And I also had some imposter syndrome. So that to me is there was some imposter syndrome. And fundamentally, I just never felt like I belonged as a lawyer, not from a imposter syndrome, but it just wasn't me.
Mm-hmm.
It truly felt like I was playing dress up, like
Yeah.
I was wearing some big adult's oversized suit and like huge heels, and it never really felt like me. And so every time I had to put on one of these stupid suits that I just need to get rid of, like I'm never going to wear this
Yeah.
again, ever. Like if I ever have to go any place where I might have to wear a suit, I ain't going. Like forget it. So I need to get rid of those, but or donate them to an organization where women could actually wear them.
Ah.
But I never really felt like me. And I think the reason that was hitting me, what you said, is because number one, I think if it can be a good indicator, good feedback. If we're feeling like we aren't who we want to be in what we have to wear to go to work, that might be a point of curiosity for folks to think, maybe I'm not in the work that I'm meant to be in. Or alternatively, as you kind of said, like the clothing that we have to wear to do the job, recognizing that a lot of us are doing jobs that we don't want to do, but we kind of have to, so to speak, to pay the bills, put food on the table, put the kids through school, whatever it might be. And so if that's your situation, then how do you embrace your personal style? In what ways you can in the office and then kind of outside the office. And so we're going to, I think, talk about that latter piece a little bit more. And so to help guide us through this, I want to direct everybody to go to the show notes, download. You have given us a link to a free PDF that is easily worth like $15 at least. I said, you can sell this.
Thank you.
It's called Holly's Tiny Book of Style. And it's by your website is whowearswho.com. We'll have all this in the show notes. But I want to kind of go through this guide. I don't want to give it all away because I want people to download it. But kind of this gives an overview of your process. And so I want to take us through, let's just say you have a 52-year-old ex-attorney come to you who now mostly works from home and no longer is an attorney because she started her own business. Purely hypothetical.
Yeah, totally.
Totally hypothetical. Now mostly works from home and pretty much lives in t-shirts and sweatpants or leggings, but occasionally does need to go out or give keynote speeches or do a training online or go to networking events. And every
maybe
time
record a podcast or something.
Record a podcast. Although in the podcast, she's like, I'm just wearing the t-shirt. But who recognizes that, okay, I might need to get out of my t-shirt and leggings, or at least kind of zhuzh them up, for lack of a better word. So let's go through your process. When somebody like that hypothetical person comes to you, where do you start with them? Hey, real quick, Gen Xers. I wanted you to know how much I have really appreciated those of you who have reached out to tell me what the podcast has meant to you, who have rated and reviewed and shared the podcast. I started doing this podcast because I was so determined to help support other Gen Xers through all the various shifts that we're making in our lives. And so I really want this podcast to be for you. Yes, you, right there, listening to this, watching this right now, for you. And so I invite you to send me an email at podcast@lifefromthesummit.com to let me know what ideas you might have for the podcast, if there's topics that you'd like to hear about, and to let me know what the podcast has meant to you. And if you can also take a minute, just a few seconds actually, right after this episode, to hit that 5-star button and leave a review for the podcast wherever you're listening. It helps me to know that this podcast is reaching people, that it actually is supporting you in making a shift. So please let me know how I can make this podcast be more for you. And now back to the show.
Yeah, so my process has 3 general parts, and then each part has a couple parts to it. So I would start, my favorite place to start is with a closet clear out. It gives us a beautiful baseline, kind of, it brings us to like a reset point. We kind of go through all of the past decisions, all the past careers, all the past choices that we know we should probably get rid of, but we haven't yet, either because it's been too busy and it's just easier to leave them in the closet because we have a beautiful large walk-in closet and have the space for it. But it gives us the opportunity to really reset and to reconnect and to make decisions about the pieces that we haven't made decisions about. So often we have bloated closets, not because we can't bear to look at it or can't bear to get rid of it or don't know where it goes, but just because we haven't made the space and the time and the container to do a really deep clear out, and respect everything that's come before, and also acknowledge that it doesn't need to come with us into the future.
I love that. And I can see for some people, myself included, the thought of cleaning out this cluster is a little
Yeah.
overwhelming. And so, how do you make that process inviting or fun, or maybe just not so heavy and overwhelming for folks?
Yeah. So I mean, the first part is that when when you've hired me to help you do a closet clear out, you have made a commitment to the process. And that is a huge step. It is saying that I have decided that this is important to dedicate time and money and energy and resources to and bring in help because it is overwhelming. Part of the reason that we don't clear out our closets is you are making thousands of decisions in a very short period of time. That is hard.
It's like decision fatigue,
It is. It's
number
decision
one. Yeah.
fatigue like to the max. Never mind figuring out what to wear each morning. This is like figuring out what to do with all of the pieces of clothing that you haven't thought about for years.
Mm-hmm. So there's a
Yeah.
couple of threads I want to pull on with that. And I
Mm-hmm.
know because you and I have talked about this in our previous conversation. You talked about, and you said this a little bit too, creating space for all the questions and emotions to come up. You said to me in one of our previous conversations. And you said one of the key tenets is respecting your maybe. So tell me a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more about that.
Yeah, I love respecting your maybe because it creates space. So sometimes we have an immediate decision about what needs to be done, and sometimes we don't. And that's okay. And it's so when I talk about respecting your maybe, it's really about giving yourself the time to come to the decision, but not putting off the decision. I think about it a little bit like you're standing at a crossroads and you have to decide which way to go. And with our clothes, we often say, I don't know which way to go. And so they stay in the crossroads and they live there. And that is exhausting. So respecting your maybe is about looking at both options, acknowledging that you can't do both, and then making a choice.
I think that's really powerful because even when we decide, I can't decide whether to get rid of that or not,
Mm-hmm.
that's still a decision.
Yeah.
And so allowing space for that maybe, I think, is really
Yeah.
powerful. It doesn't force you to make a decision in the moment when you're
Mm-hmm.
not ready. And I kind of
Mm-hmm.
want to talk about some of the grief behind letting go of things in a moment. But physically, do
Yeah.
you do something with the maybes? Do you put them in a separate pile, move them to a different part of the closet? How would you treat those maybes?
Yeah, so the process I use, we make decisions and we keep momentum flowing. So another part of respecting your maybe is that it lets you set that piece aside and keep moving through your closet. So we
Oh,
put
good.
that
Yeah.
there and we know that we'll come back to it. And if we keep making decisions and we keep going, because another part of what bogs us down in our closet is that we answer complicated questions before we have to. So tackling grief is deep. And if you come to a complicated piece of clothing that does have grief to it, that you do need to process, and you pause what you are doing, you process the grief, you're not going to continue with the rest of the other clothes. You have just done an
You're
entire grieving process. No way.
likely, if you're me, you're going to go make a margarita and
Exactly.
watch a Jason Momoa movie to soothe yourself, right?
Understandably.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it lets us know that we're going to come back to that grieving process, but also keep moving with other decisions.
I really, really like that approach because
Mm-hmm.
there's something to be said for the momentum. Once you commit to
Yeah,
the process and get in it, keep the momentum going. And so putting that
exactly.
maybe pile to the side is
Yeah.
just efficient and it keeps
Yeah.
you in that momentum. I really want to unpack this grief piece because I think it's so important, especially for people of my generation who our bodies are changing. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
we're gaining weight or we're losing weight. We might have a physical condition or illness that has changed the shape of our body. We might just have clothes from a time period that we really loved. Maybe they were clothes from when you were in your excuse me, in your 20s and going out a lot, or Like I have a couple pieces of my mom's clothing that
Yeah.
I don't wear, but I just like to have them around to remind me of her. You could have clothes from maybe pre-baby, who knows? And
Mm-hmm.
so whatever the representation that clothing has for a particular point in your life, we really want to recognize that there can be some very legitimate and understandable grief associated with not wanting to let those clothes go. So, walk us through how you would support somebody through that grieving of being able to either say maybe or finding a way to eventually letting those go if that's the right decision for them.
Yeah, and I think the first thing that I do is there's no wrong answer. Like I always say that if we go through your closet and you decide to keep every single piece of clothing, that's okay because you have decided. It's really about getting things out of limbo. Like there's so much in
Mm.
our closets that's just sitting in limbo. And so I'm never going to tell someone to get rid of their mom's clothes. Like not going to happen. Those are sentimental objects and maybe they don't live in your closet. Maybe they live in a special memory box in your closet. Just kind of a way of knowing that these are not my everyday clothes and they can be separate and they can be like a scrapbook.
Mm.
And sometimes it also depends a lot on the flavor of grief. So we can have grief for people that we love who are no longer here. And can be a really sweet grief. It can be a grief of remembering. And we can also have griefs of we look really good in that top, but it's also the top that we wore on that first date with that guy who was like not so good, but we kind of forget how bad he was until we remember and we're like, oh, that's why I don't wear that top anymore. And I really shouldn't.
This shirt is one of those. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really about like, we talk a lot through how that piece makes you feel now. Like, is
Mm.
it part of your now and is it part of your future? If not, then it's only part of your past. And is it a part of your past that's worth carrying forward?
Oh, that's beautiful. And that's such a more trauma informed, for lack of a better phrase, grief
Yeah.
informed, maybe,
Yeah.
approach than what we see on some reality TV shows,
Mm-hmm.
which I appreciate and I
Yeah.
like to watch, believe me, but where somebody comes in and just gets rid of everything in somebody's closet because it's not in style or
Mm-hmm.
it's too old or whatever it might be. And that can be very discombobulating for somebody. And we've talked about that a little bit
Yeah.
in our previous conversations. So tell me about the discombobulation that can happen if you just go in and you just gut your whole closet because there's an identity shift, not a
Yeah.
not a cutoff, but an identity shift that needs to be made. So how do you support people through that?
Yeah. It's a really important point that like the teen movie makeover montage scenes don't talk about, the like reality TV shows don't talk about. The first part of it is that if we just got rid of all your clothes, gave you a whole new closet that was perfectly in style and super fashionable and probably costs a lot more than your current closet does, it's going to be in a house where nothing else has changed. You're still going to have the same sofa. You're still going to have the same desk. You're still going to have the same computer and the same kitchenware. Like you're going to be wearing these clothes that are totally new in a space that's hasn't caught up to that, which is part of why I think that Queer Eye is so successful because they do both in
Yeah,
tandem
I was just going to
and
say,
in a
unless you're having
really like
Queer Eye.
holistic way. Exactly, exactly. Yeah, so that's part of it. The other part is that whenever we go through big changes, either in our closets or anywhere else, we need time to adjust. Like we need time to settle into the new work role and responsibilities. We need time to, I'm not a parent, but we need time to like become a parent. Like that's the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
When we move to a new space or a new city or a new relationship, or like it's so tender. Like that
Mm.
time is really important. And you need time to stabilize things when we have big changes. Just remember how like discombobulating COVID was. Like everything changed kind of overnight, but like not really overnight. And so you were kind of in that weird spot. And then like no one knew what was happening. Like that.
It's a great example.
Yeah.
I just really value, and I hope people are really taking that to heart, because just to kind of pull all of that together, your wardrobe is a piece of your identity.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you are noticing any type of identity shift, whether it's in your career, becoming a parent, sending kids off to school,
Mm-hmm.
getting older yourself, undergoing physical changes, whatever it might be, your identity is shifting. And so your relationship with the clothing needs to be gradual. And maybe there's
Mm-hmm.
people who can do a complete closet clear out and be
Yep.
totally fine.
Yep.
Each person has a different approach. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that if that works for you.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, myself included, that more gradual identity shift is more humane. And so
Mm-hmm.
being able to look at a piece of clothing that might bring up some emotions for you, and go back to what you were saying in terms of, is this part of, and I won't say it exactly how you said it, so correct me because you said it much better, but is this part of who I am now and who I want to carry into the future? Or is this part of who I was in the past? And if so, is there some way that I can maybe honor that? And take me through, we talked a little bit about maybe some rituals that
Mm-hmm.
people could use if there are really sentimental pieces of clothing in their closet. So what are some rituals that you can offer to people if there is that kind of connection to an item?
Yeah. I think the closest like alternative object would be like a scrapbook. Like I have worked with people and we've like created a segment of their closet that was basically a scrapbook that you could just flip through.
Mm,
But we like put it into a specific spot in their closet. We used hang tags to kind of like contain it. So when they're getting dressed in the morning, they don't need to go through those clothes. They're not interspersed with their daily closet. And I think that's one of my favorite parts about clothing is it is both so identity and part of who we are, and it is utterly practical of we have to get dressed every single day. And that's why I focus on the days when you're running late, fighting a cold, and it's laundry day. Because if your style doesn't work, then it doesn't work.
no, no.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
That,
And the other option for sentimental objects is to display them. Like that's also an option. There's like you could display them on a bookshelf. You could also do, I know people who have done like those t-shirt quilts. They take
yeah,
all
I
of
was
their
thinking of
old
that.
t-shirts and like make a new object that they can keep on the couch. So there's a lot of different ways we can work with sentimental objects, and it really is about finding your rituals that are meaningful to you. Just
Yeah.
like your objects are different than somebody else's, your rituals are as well.
I think that's beautiful. And I'm going to add one to that if I can. I
Yeah.
know when I was going through a lot of my mom's stuff,
Yeah.
and she passed in 2012, and it was hard to get rid of those even though they
Mm-hmm.
weren't clothing that I was going to wear.
Mm-hmm.
It was still hard to get rid of them, just like it was for any sentimental object associated with her. One of the things that helped me over time, again, this did not happen overnight, was to look at particularly a piece of clothing. And if it was taking up space in my closet, I thought of what my mom would want for that, and to think of somebody else who could actually get use and functionality or warmth out of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That made that piece of clothing then have a bigger mission than just living in my closet. And so there
Yes.
might be a way that you can, if you can think of donating them or taking, especially women's suits, there are lots, and maybe for men
Mm-hmm.
too, great organizations
Mm-hmm.
that help unhoused people get suits so they can wear them to job interviews and that kind of thing. So
Yes.
to think of what could this piece of clothing be doing beyond just living in my closet, and then maybe take a
Mm-hmm.
picture of it to save, to
Yeah.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's an element of items and clothing that we want to, we keep because we want it to have a good home, but not realizing that, are we giving it the best home? Probably not. So if we can find like a specific and thoughtful home for those more sentimental pieces that aren't sentimental enough to keep, but are sentimental enough to give very intentionally, that can also help.
Yeah. That just inspired me for this whole, I'll kind of shift the camera, this whole
Yes.
cluster of purses up there,
Yeah.
most of which are not sentimental. I don't carry a purse if I don't have to. The one I do carry is teeny tiny. And it just dawned on me, I'm like, there's so many women and other
Mm-hmm.
people too who might want to be using those purses. So
Yes.
let me give them a better home, because they are literally, I had to go up there the other day to look for an old wallet in one of them, literally collecting dust. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not giving them a good home. I
Yeah.
want somebody else to give them a good home.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all
And if it
right.
helps you move them along, like if they're leather or basically any fiber will start to kind of deteriorate if it's not actively used. So this is a real thing for like shoes and handbags. If they're genuine, if they're real leather, they're going to start like cracking and drying out. And then they will
Yep.
eventually not become the useful things that they could have kept being if they had been in someone's closet who was using them every day.
Yeah. Now I feel bad for the purses. Yeah. No, I'm going to get rid of those ASAP,
There
or
you go.
donate them someplace, because yeah, I
Yeah.
want them to have a good
Yeah.
life. So
Yeah.
let me take just one example, and then we'll move on to the next part of your
Yes.
process. I have, let me see if I can, I have a dress, a formal
Mm.
dress that I wore to Obama's inauguration. I'll have to see if I'll find a
Ah.
picture. It's a very long, with like a long
Mhm.
leg slit up the side. So
Mhm.
very sentimental. I don't get
Yeah.
dressed up like this ever. And now I'm just going to throw it on the floor because I don't want to hang it up. So I don't imagine getting rid of that anytime
Mhm.
soon.
Mhm.
But I love your idea of making the scrapbook for that. I
Yeah.
think that would be, and I could even take one of these stupid attorney suits
Yeah.
to put in the scrapbook too, because I think years down the road, that's why we have scrapbooks, is because it's cool to look back on
Absolutely.
those
Yeah.
memories. And so to take a
Yep.
couple of those pieces
Mhm.
from my time in DC essentially
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
make a little scrapbook, I think is a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love including the dress along with one of your like lawyerly suits because it really ties the two together of like, this was not the career I was supposed to be doing or that I found fulfilling, but look how many cool opportunities it included.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
thank you for that
Yeah.
story reframe. I so appreciate that, because it's so true. And that's
Yeah.
what, looking back, when I'm 90 years old, hope, I don't know if I'll
Yeah.
still be living in this closet, but look back, like these are part of my story. They're a
Mm-hmm.
visual
Yeah.
representation of part of my journey. So
Yeah.
that's really cool. All right.
Yeah.
Anything else on the closet clear out phase of working with people that we didn't cover? That was a lot just on
Yeah.
clearing out the
Yeah.
closet.
It's deep stuff. It's deep
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, I think the final thing I would say is that I get a lot of people who are weirded out needing help cleaning out their closet.
Oh, I
And
imagine.
I
Yeah.
I just want to say that like it's not weird to need help. It's a big task and I work mostly virtually and so people are like, but you're not physically helping. That's not the hard part of the closet clear out. The like physical sorting of things. If it was someone else's closet, you could do it in an hour. It's the energetic, it's the memory, it's the space, it's the container, it's having someone to keep the momentum going.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's like the coaching aspect of what you do.
Yes.
Like you're there
Yeah.
to support somebody through
Mm-hmm.
that. And hey, like throw on some good music, like light some
Yeah.
candles. I mean, whatever, like make it be a fun,
Hmm.
supportive
Yeah.
process. And that's what I hear in
Yes.
everything that you're saying. It doesn't have to be this forceful, like, let's just get
Hmm.
all this crap out of here.
Hmm.
Let's let's respect the journey that these
Yeah.
clothes have been part of as we're going through that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the next step of your process?
Yeah. Then we kind of bring cohesion to your style. It's really about figuring out the closet system in terms of do you prefer outfits? Do you prefer mix and match? Kind of what's the underlying structure that'll bring your personal style into a very easeful, operationalized way of being. So how do we put everything together so that you have outfits that you love wearing? And then how do we build a morning routine, build a flow, build a laundry system, build all of the logistics that make living your style effortless day to day to day.
Wow, I've never heard somebody talk about style like that, like factoring in laundry
Uh-huh.
days,
Yeah.
because it's such a, I just had like a duh moment there because, yeah, never fails. If I do ever leave my house,
Mm-hmm.
whatever I want to wear is probably wrinkled or in the laundry. And so I'm like, well, I'm not going to wear it
Yes.
anyway. So
Yeah.
factoring that in, that's brilliant. And I feel like we almost missed a step, or should have talked about this
Yeah.
in the beginning. But before you even clear out the closet, it seems like somebody needs to know, well, what is my personal sense of style? So do you sit down with people ahead of time and kind of draw that out of them so that they sort of have a definition for themselves of what that looks like?
Out in working together. It's really a process of discovery because whether or not you know how to verbalize your style, you know how to live it and you know what it is. So we talk all throughout this process about what feels good, what qualities are you looking for, how do you kind of in an ideal world, what would you do? And we try and bring that idealism into the practical day to day. So throughout the process, we're drawing out and working towards, you don't have to have a clear, like, this is what I want to look like, but everybody has what they want to work towards. So throughout the process, we kind of develop your style statement. And it's basically a collection of qualities or words or terms that you can keep coming back to and use as a reference point as you're making decisions, as you're thinking through, as you're trying to figure out what to wear when you're sick and don't really want to do anything. It's a way of coming back to, and it's almost a way of like recentering. I think about it
Mm-hmm.
very much like when your top gets kind of off kilter, what are you coming back to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I imagine that it's a very iterative
Mm-hmm.
process because
Yeah.
I think, yeah, for most people, if you ask them what's your sense of style, I know for a lot of Gen Xers, it'd be like, we just want to be comfortable. Like we're at the
Yeah.
stage now, we just
Yeah.
want to be comfortable. I don't care what that is. And beyond that, I don't know, so
Mm-hmm.
to have it be sort of that iterative process so
Mm-hmm.
that people can start to really tap into what we're talking about here is how do you want to feel
Mm-hmm.
when you're sick and in
Mm-hmm.
clothes or a robe? How do you want to
Mm-hmm.
feel when you are going to work? How do you want to feel
Mm-hmm.
when you're working out? So it's really getting in touch with all the felt sense essentially of what we want to be experiencing when we're wearing clothes is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
break down that second part a little bit with the sort of figuring out all of that system
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
style.
Yeah. And I think I always think about the logistics of style, and I think that really comes from starting as in costume design because fashion designers don't need to think about the logistics of how something's going to get cleaned or how what's going to happen to it, whereas a costume designer does. Like we need to think through, I mean, the costume designer in combination with the wardrobe, the people who actually run the shows, it's a I use costume design kind of for the
Mm-hmm.
entire department. But there is a lot of logistics to it. There's a lot of very practical, how do we get this done to it? So I like to start where people are. So we start with what your morning currently is. Like if your morning and getting dressed routine is grab whatever's on the top of the pile, we can change what's in the pile. And that can
Mm.
stay the same routine, but have different outcomes. If your current laundry setup is that you do laundry every Saturday or every Sunday or every Tuesday night, then we can build a closet that will get you all the way throughout the week without running out of things that you love to wear.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so key because yeah, if you laundry is such a just a great example of daily life, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's something if you can systematize it, just like
Yeah,
batch cooking on a Sunday or something,
exactly.
it
Yes.
makes the rest of your week so sane. So if you
Yeah.
realize that, oh crap, tomorrow I got to wear a pair of pants I wasn't counting on
Mm-hmm.
there in the laundry. So
Mm-hmm.
tonight I got to do some laundry that I wasn't planning on. That it just upsets your
Yeah.
whole apple cart for the day, right? So yeah, if you can get through the week and
Yeah.
know that you're doing okay, laundry is Sunday night or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
might be, and I don't have
Mm-hmm.
to worry about what I'm wearing
Mm-hmm.
during the week because I know that
Mm-hmm.
I have my closet set up to support that. I
Yeah.
think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant.
I will also insist that you have at least one, maybe two or three backup pieces so that if laundry has to get pushed to Tuesday, you're still fine.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Extra underwear too.
Yeah. Always. Oh my gosh. Life changing.
Extra underwear always.
Yes.
Yes, you never know
Yes.
what's going to
Yes.
happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
And socks. Socks are like
Yep.
also. Yeah.
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 Let's kind of talk about well, okay, so I don't want to get us off track because I have so many questions. So that's sort of like the second phase, right, in this
Yes. Yep.
process.
Yep.
Anything else that you want to tell us about that second phase of the logistics of your closet?
Yeah. I think that people are always more creative than they give themselves credit for. I get a lot of people who are like, I can't style things. And once we clear out your closet, once we get some logistics in there, they're styling things left, right, and center. I'm like, what were you talking about?
Well, I wonder if some of that comes
Yeah.
from thinking that I can't style things according to what people
Yes.
think I should be wearing or
Yes.
external
Yes.
expectations of what I
Yeah.
should be wearing. Yeah. So
Yes.
let's like throw that crap
Yeah.
aside, first of all.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, I think about this in terms of like working out a little bit of like, you know, when you've pushed your body too far, even if you have no idea how to train somebody else. So just because you couldn't style somebody else doesn't mean you can't style yourself. Just because you don't know what proportions look good or how to manipulate proportions doesn't mean you don't know what looks good to you on you. So you don't need to become an expert to style your own clothes and your own closet and your own style.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're already an expert in yourself. You just may
Exactly.
not know it. So somebody
Exactly.
like you can help draw that out, is the point of that. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
what's the next step in the process?
Yeah, the third step is procuring what you need. Like once we've done a clear out, you probably have many fewer clothes than you had. And then once we've kind of cohered your style and brought it all together, then we know what you're missing. And usually that is actually a very small number of pieces. Usually they're higher quality pieces than you've ever bought before. Usually they're very specific pieces, but they're not, you don't need an entirely new wardrobe. You have stuff you love. We all do.
Mm-hmm.
You just need to wear it and then get a couple supporting things that will really make those elements shine.
And I imagine that depends on the individual, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of
Yeah.
times we'll hear, oh, for women, like make sure you have a crisp white t-shirt or something. Or for men, make sure you always have like a one
Yeah.
blue button up or something. But
Yeah.
it's really going to depend on each person,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you're going to have those pieces, but they're going to be for you.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to have the pieces that you couldn't live without. You're going to have your go-to pieces, but they're not going to be what's on the must have in every woman's wardrobe list because they're unique to you.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that's important because I guess I would put myself in this category
Yeah.
of I imagine there's people out there who hate to shop. Some people
Mm-hmm.
love to shop. I used to be one of them. I could shut down an outlet mall, like I could
Mm-hmm.
open it up and I could shut it down. Not anymore. That was like in
Mm-hmm.
my 20s. And not only that, but budget, money.
Yeah.
People don't
Yeah.
want to have to go buy a whole new wardrobe. And so if we're
Yeah.
talking about just a couple of key
Yeah.
pieces, and you said that are higher quality, and I think that's an important pill for people
Yeah.
to swallow. I mean, look, if you're on a budget and you want to go get something that is less expensive, that is absolutely okay. Recognize that it may not last as long. And so we're kind of talking about investment for the long
Mm-hmm.
term. And
Mm-hmm.
so investing in higher quality pieces often means that they're going to stand the test of time too. Unless you're
Yeah.
buying something totally crazy. And I don't know if I have anything completely crazy in here to point to, maybe. But something that will stand the test of time
Yeah.
and wear. And a
Yeah.
lot of times just making that upfront investment, knowing that, okay, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to have to buy this piece again for another 5 or 10 years and I'll be good.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
you don't have to go get them all at once. I mean, it's
Exactly.
okay to just
Yeah.
go get maybe one item for now and then get
Yeah.
another one down the road. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's why procuring the clothes you need to procure comes last. It comes at the end after you have developed confidence in your style decisions.
Yeah.
And once you know what you wear, once you know what you love, once you know what you keep reaching for, I'm not going to say it becomes like easy to spend a ton of money on clothes, but it becomes a lot easier to trust yourself to make the
Mm.
right purchases.
Mm.
The other thing I'll say about that is they tend to hold resale value better. Not
Oh,
all
yeah.
expensive
Mm-hmm.
clothes, but it kind of gives you a little bit of that out of I can try this piece if it's within the return window and I've bought from a company that doesn't just throw out their returns, then I can always return it. If it doesn't work for me, I get it home, I try it with a couple outfits, it's not an option, or I can resell it, or I can donate it and make somebody's year. Like it's a very cheap clothing. And I don't mean monetarily cheap because some very
Yeah.
high price tag pieces can be very cheaply made.
Yep.
But cheap clothing doesn't have a life cycle. And that's detrimental to everybody.
Yeah.
Whereas higher quality pieces, better fabrics, better finishes, more like clothes that have integrity from a like object perspective. Like they hold together. Like the parts make more than the sum of the part. Like the whole is more than the sum of the parts. They have a life cycle and they have a lifespan. So it's not going to just sit in your closet forever. You can pass it on knowing that you're making a good decision.
Yeah. I think that's so valuable. And another, I think, helpful thing for folks to keep in mind is that depending on where you live, of course,
Yeah.
but this doesn't mean that you have to go to a department store or a
Mm-hmm.
mall. There
Mm-hmm.
can be, I know, like over in Boulder, for example, the
Mm-hmm.
vintage shops, the used
Yes.
clothing shops in Boulder are phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that is going to depend on where you live, and it might take a
Mm-hmm.
little more energy to go to a used clothing
Mm-hmm.
store, but you can still find some really
Yeah,
good pieces that are high quality at a little bit lower price tag if you're willing to put a
absolutely.
little more time into it. But
Yeah.
if you want to go to the mall, the department store, that's great
Mm-hmm.
too, or order
Mm-hmm.
online. It's just there are options. I think I want people to know
Yes.
that for somebody like
Yes.
me, the only reason I go to the mall is to take my laptop there and then I'm in and out, like done.
Yes.
So I want to talk just a bit about, and this kind of comes back to the closet clearing too,
Mm-hmm.
an issue I think for men and women alike is oftentimes, especially as we're getting older, a lot of us, not everyone, but a lot of us are gaining weight.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a real reluctance. I have a whole pile of genes up
Mm-hmm.
there that speak to this because of my like COVID
Yeah.
15 or whatever,
Yeah.
that we don't want to get rid of the smaller
Yeah.
size. And this kind of comes back to the grieving that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, but we don't want to go buy, I don't want to spend money on a bigger
Mm-hmm.
size because I
Mm-hmm.
don't want the bigger number for the size.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want to, I'm going to lose the weight. So I want to, not go spend money on something that I'm not going to wear. And I think this comes back to not only the grieving, but to creating acceptance for where you are now. And
Yeah.
and I think that just because we don't fit into the smaller jeans doesn't mean you won't ever,
Mm-hmm.
but let's be kind to our bodies and not stuff them into something that is really uncomfortable because it's the wrong size.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go buy something that's kinder to our bodies, that probably looks better on us, that fits better, and that feels better. And still recognize that, yeah, I may lose the weight. And if I do, then I'll donate the pants or I'll save them for when I
Yeah.
gain the weight back later in the future. So speak to me about how you kind of walk people through, or what you would recommend for those of us who I just don't want to buy the bigger size.
Yeah. So clothing sizing is fascinating and a whole topic. And there is no standard. There is no standard clothing sizing between brands. So every brand has their clothing measurement sizing standard across the brand, but somebody's 8 is somebody else's 10, is somebody else's 12. It is a smorgasbord of chaos that ruins everybody's life.
Absolutely.
And nobody knows what size you're wearing but you. So it's really a internal, it's coming to a place where your body and your comfort and your sense of self and sense of self worth, because we live in a culture that puts so much emphasis on size, it's coming to a place where that is more important than brands making things easy to buy. Like couture doesn't have sizing. You have measurements, but you don't have a size. There,
Mm.
like that does not exist.
Mm. I did not realize that.
Yeah.
I've never bought couture. That's fascinating. And so, like, God, just like the almost like the classism that goes into that, right? Like,
Yeah.
let's let all of us who can't afford to
Mm-hmm.
buy couture get
Mm-hmm.
wrapped up in this self image around a
Yeah.
number,
Yeah.
and a number
Yeah.
that we want to cling to for dear life. And so basically what I'm
Mm-hmm.
hearing is that we got to let the number go. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter. And I love what you said. Nobody
Yeah.
knows what size you're wearing but you.
It's true. And so like, and at the same time, like you do have numbers because you do have measurements.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a blog post on, I think it's like 84 reasons your clothes don't fit. And it basically
Oh.
lists like 84 potential measurements that your body has. We pay attention to like 3 of them. Like
Mm-hmm.
there are so many intricacies with our bodies. And if you think about how complicated like your shoulder is, when we talk about suits and arms not fitting, there's so much that goes into that. None of it has to do with your bust measurement, your waist measurement, or your hip measurement. So you have measurements and those are neutral. Like the weight that they are from a garment construction perspective. And again, this is coming back to the costume design background that I have, because a lot of pieces are made for shows, and you take the measurements, you make the clothes to fit, and you move on with your life, and who cares? From a garment construction perspective, they are a neutral element. What weight is placed on your size and your measurement is cultural.
Mm. But oh yeah,
Yeah.
I actually felt the weight lift off of me
Mm.
having that said, like just hearing
Mhm.
those words that it is because we know it,
Yeah.
but it bears repeating that it's all about the culture, the
Yeah.
advertising, the standards of beauty, which are based on white
Mhm.
standards of beauty in the US at
Mhm.
least, and
Mhm.
sizes and all of that. So,
Yeah.
like, just to free ourselves
Mhm.
of that.
Yeah.
So, I want to juxtapose that very powerful insight with some also practicalities
Mhm.
of for those of us who have to go into an office or maybe have to
Mhm.
present if even if we're working from
Mhm.
home have to present on
Mhm.
video.
Mhm.
I want to start and kind of go through a spectrum here with how we learn to balance or integrate or adjust our personal style for a workplace that maybe doesn't like or cater to or give
Mhm.
space for us to really embrace our personal style. So, what advice
Yeah.
or wisdom do you have starting with that?
Yeah, that this is the moment where our personal expression and ourselves and our self image and our personal style meets the outside world is a I find it a fascinating moment because it what it really boils down to is the world perceiving you accurately. And the
Mm,
answer, if you have any intersection with a marginalized identity or a historically excluded identity, will be usually no. There are so many delicate balancing acts that people do when we introduce another person into the conversation. It's the reason that relationships are so hard. It's the reason that office culture and office politics is a whole thing and can have more standing on your job prospects than what you do as a job, like how good you are. It is the interpersonal is so intricate. And so it really becomes a matter of starting with who you are and kind of coming back to that personal style and that center. And being clear in your center means that you can respond to the outside world instead of react to it.
mm,
So you have your center and you have your external circumstances. And if you do have to wear something that's completely not you, you can intentionally make that choice. And even as you're doing that, you can make other choices in other domains to find a new job or find a different career or make changes, longer term changes that will give you the power, the socioeconomic, political, call it what you want, the influence to have more freedom of self expression in your work life.
yeah. It comes
I
back
don't,
to what
yeah,
I think that made perfect sense. And it comes back to
yeah.
what we talked about at the beginning in terms of kind of what's the feedback you're getting
Mm-hmm,
from the information that you
mm-hmm.
know you can't embrace your personal style fully at work. And so
Yeah,
what is that feedback that you're getting?
yeah,
And as with anything, easier said than done, of course, that it all
yeah.
comes back to like standing true in ourselves. And so,
Mm-hmm,
I know even if I had to put a suit on again
mm-hmm,
someday, I would do it if I quote had to, but
mm-hmm.
that kind of comes back down to what do you really have to do at the end of the day? But let's just assume that we're
Yeah,
intentionally choosing for to pay the
yeah.
bills, to keep the job,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
that we're intentionally choosing to put the suit on. Can I still know who I am in a suit? And that
Mm-hmm,
knowing that a suit isn't going to change fundamentally who I am at my
yeah,
core. And I want to
exactly.
drill down on that a little bit because there are some very real practicalities and concerns when it comes
Mm-hmm,
to communities of color,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
LGBTQIA communities. Because, for example, we recently heard of the Crown Act getting
Mm-hmm.
passed, which,
Yeah.
on one hand, I'm so grateful that it was passed. On the other hand, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. that we had to pass this. And for folks who don't know, the Crown Act was passed to allow people to be able to wear their natural hairstyles into the office place, because a lot of times we're talking about Black Americans, African Americans, indigenous cultures, they have not historically had the freedom in a lot of workplaces to be able to wear their hair the way that they want to wear it. And so clearly we're not going to fix that problem overnight. So how can somebody who's in a marginalized community be able to still embrace that personal sense of style, whether it's with how they want to wear their hair, if they want to wear something that's more representative of their culture or more representative of the gender that they really feel aligned with, that the outside world doesn't see them as aligned with that, right? So how can we navigate those very real problems?
Yeah. The first thing that I will say to that, because it doesn't often get said in these conversations, is that playing it safe is an entirely legitimate answer. Like choosing to play it safe, choosing to fit in, especially if you're entering a new work environment or a new school environment or a new community environment. Giving yourself time to read the landscape is a really powerful move. And so that, I'll say that up front because I don't think it gets talked about enough. I think we often jump straight to express yourself, be yourself, without acknowledging that it can be incredibly dangerous.
Yeah. For a
So
number
there's
of
that.
reasons. Yeah.
For
Physically,
a number,
economically, name.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Safety in every dimension that we need safety. Then, if you are looking to be more expressive, similar to when you're looking to elevate your style or come into your style, you can take small steps and you can make the transition gradual. You can start small and adjust and add another piece to that and adjust and add another piece to that and adjust. You don't have to go 0 to 60 in however fast an electric car can do that these days. Like it is, you can give yourself time. You can give yourself space. You can start with running errands. You can start with people who you know love you and will accept you as you change your style and begin to express more of who you are. So those would be my primary thoughts on that.
Yeah. I really love all of those insights, and especially the one about safety. I mean, at the end of the day, that's a judgment call for you to make in terms
Yeah.
of what risk or lack of risk do you feel comfortable with in terms of expressing your style. And so I think that is often not a conversation that's had, because you're right. So much of the messaging is express yourself, embrace yourself. And while I think that has a lot of beautiful messages and undertones with it, there is that risk of safety that a lot of communities of color face. And it's not that easy for them sometimes to just embrace your style when they have to go into a workplace that doesn't see it that way. So I appreciate you talking about that. Okay, so wow, we have covered a lot. I'm just looking back at some of my notes to make sure, because I had a lot of notes about things I wanted to ask you. Is there anything else about your process that I haven't asked you or that you want to add to or kind of wrap up with?
Yeah, I love that I work in a field where you get to practice it every day. I love that we get dressed every morning, and every morning is a new chance to try again if it didn't go so well yesterday.
I love that you
Yeah.
said every morning, by the way, because let's really operationalize that. So somebody gets up in the morning, they're already dragging ass because they are tired and don't want to go to work. Again, totally hypothetical.
Yeah.
But then they go into their closet and they're like, what am I going to wear today? How does your process help make that decision making more easeful for them on a daily basis?
Yeah, we remove everything that doesn't work. Like if everything in your closet works for you and your style every single day, then failing is really difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
so true. Because
Yeah.
if I had, if I do
Mm-hmm.
ever leave the house, when I come into my closet,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, God, what am I going to wear? I usually start over here with like the
Yeah.
somewhat cute shirts. And
Yeah.
admittedly, some of these could probably go, but I'll usually pull out like a black
Yeah.
something
Mm-hmm.
and combine it with black leggings, and
Uh-huh.
then maybe a cardigan or something that
Mm-hmm.
covers up my butt. Like that's sort
Mm-hmm.
of, and, and I think the big invitation here is that I want to, for myself,
Yeah.
I want to pause in that process and
Mm-hmm.
say, is that really what I feel like on
Mm-hmm.
the inside? Is that really
Mm-hmm.
expressing who I want to be on the inside? And so that's my number one takeaway. Secondly, and we haven't really talked about this too much, but is shoes.
Yeah.
I used to be where I pulled these out. These are like an example of like my old lawyer shoes. And for folks who
Ooh.
can't see, they're like these metallic-y silver gray. God, I don't know. Is this like a 4-inch heel or something with
That's
a
an
little
impressive heel. Yeah.
peep toe? This is the kind of crap I used to wear all the time as a lawyer. And my calves are a nightmare because of it. So there's a whole lot that we could say around expectations, particularly of women in
Mm-hmm.
professional fields. Like I
Mm-hmm.
remember I was started being a lawyer in 19, so when you were very young.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, won't go there. But
Skipping
there were
over. Yep.
yep, so many judges that did not allow women to wear pantsuits into the courtroom.
Yeah.
Happily, things have started to change. There are still some pretty old
Mm-hmm.
school judges. If you're a judge out there listening to this for whatever reason, get over it, first of all. But this brings in so many of the things that we were talking about. I mean,
Yeah.
not only could women in some courtrooms not wear a pantsuit, but that meant that maybe transgender people had to
Mm-hmm.
wear what a judge wanted them to wear, which would be a skirt. And that might not have been what that person wanted to wear if they weren't
Mm-hmm.
somebody who embraced an identity that wore skirts.
Mm-hmm.
There are also, I know, Black attorneys, particularly women, who hesitate, coming back to hair
Yeah.
again, to wear their hair in a
Yeah.
natural manner because they're
Yes.
afraid it will take away from their credibility in front of a judge, which is
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so much, again, wrapped up in how the external world perceives us. And it comes back again to sort of walking that balance between what feels safe for you, what risk can you take, how
Mm-hmm.
can you do that small and gradually. But at the end of the day, we're not going to change what the
Mm-hmm.
external world thinks of us.
Yeah.
And so there has to be some letting go of that. And again, I recognize that that's going to be different for different communities, different cultures, and that as a white person, I have that privilege of saying, I
Mm-hmm.
don't care what you think about me, right? But I think that the more we can find, even outside of our work environments, if we're living in those kinds of, or working in those kinds of oppressive systems, to find ways outside of that, in addition to finding the little ways inside of it to really embrace our style. So if that means that you come home and you put on something that feels like 100% you, like honor that part of yourself that didn't get to fully express itself during the day.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I'll add to that is that individually, we might not be able to change how everybody perceives everything, but collectively, we can make
Yep,
huge differences.
I agree.
And, and like what you were saying about needing to present in a way that a judge finds acceptable, I think that it's very obvious as a lawyer, but it's true in every sort of field. Just the person that we're needing buy-in from changes.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of adjusting and trying to maybe buck social norms is not really what we're saying, but it's a little bit of it. I think that I think there's opportunities in every moment if we can find them.
Yeah.
And even if that means that you never wear open-toed shoes because the place you express yourself is your pedicure, like that could be an option.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And back on the shoes real quick. I
Mm-hmm.
got off on my tangent, but I was going to say footwear is so important. And
Yeah.
it's one of those things like I did used to wear the cute little shoes and all of that. And now I'm like, no, I want to be comfortable. My feet
Mhm.
need to not be crammed into, I don't know how women do it, the wedge super high heel. I'm like, oh, that's not good for your body. It's not good for your feet.
Mhm.
And yet women do it, right?
Mhm.
Because they either
Mhm.
love it or they think that's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Both
Yeah.
camps. But what words of wisdom do you have in terms of footwear? Because we've talked a lot about the clothing, but
Yes.
what about footwear?
Invest in high quality footwear, regardless of what is on your feet. Like, please, please, please invest in good footwear that is supportive, that fits your feet, that doesn't, like, is not rubbing and causing blisters and all of that, but also it the footwear is so interesting because it's such a clear line where it needs to look good, otherwise we don't wear it. But it also is a very practical thing because it changes how your entire body stands and walks and reacts and operates. So most people, this comes mostly from working with actresses who almost everybody has a heel height that they prefer if you have to wear a heel. Like some people love a 90-inch or a 90 centimeter.
I was like,
No,
wow,
Jesus Christ. That was
holy cow.
a 90 centimeter stiletto. And some people love a kitten heel, and some people only do a block heel. I knew somebody who found it easier to walk in stilettos than block heels because how her foot worked, like her gait meant that in a stiletto she could land on any part of the stiletto, and she had the ankle strength to support herself if she landed kind of off kilter. But for a block heel, she was more likely to stumble and fall because she couldn't land wherever she wanted on the back of the heel.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a preference, and your feet have preferences, and your body has a preference. And the more you can honor that preference and work with that preference, the more supported you'll be overall.
I think that's so valuable because people, and I'm talking to the youngsters here, as having been a youngster at one point, we want to wear the cool shoes. I
Mm-hmm.
know back when I was a lawyer, the series Ally McBeal had just come out.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all about the super short skirts, which I wore,
Mm-hmm.
and the big, big heels.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll confess, I there might have been a small part of me that liked to wear that stuff, but I'll be fully honest, there was a bigger part of me that just liked the compliments that I got from wearing them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's,
Yeah.
consider that.
Yeah.
But for God, if you can start wearing better footwear the younger you are,
Mm-hmm.
please do
Mm-hmm.
it because
Mm-hmm.
it's so true. Everything starts with your feet from the ground up.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I love
Yeah.
that advice of invest in good footwear, and you can still
Mm-hmm.
find cute,
Mm-hmm.
fashionable footwear that's comfortable. It might take you a little while to
Yes.
find it, but again,
Yeah.
you're talking about putting an investment into yourself. And so
Mm-hmm.
take that time to
Yeah.
find that good quality clothing and footwear. Yeah.
Yes. And like for footwear, it's really an investment in your health for the rest of your life. It's one of those
Amen.
things like it has knock-on effects for decades. And if
Oh,
that means you
totally.
have fewer fewer pairs of shoes, but they're all higher quality, go for it.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah.
So worth it.
I
Absolutely.
have one calf different from the other because back when I was wearing super high
Yeah.
heels all the time, I would usually put my tennis shoes on to walk from the short walk from the metro to my office. And then I'd
Mm-hmm.
wear my heels around the office all day.
Yeah.
So that's like 8 hours where your calf
Mm-hmm.
is crunched up. And I was
Yeah.
doing Ironmans at the time, or I did my first Ironman at the time, did the Ironman race, came back, was at my friend's house playing with their kids, and went to jump rope with the kids. And I
Oh.
jumped, and I thought one of the kids shot me in the calf because my calf just ripped because it was
Oh.
so tight, not only from wearing the heels,
Yeah.
but from,
Yeah.
Ironman didn't
Mm-hmm.
help either.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I was like, you know what? I am done with these heels.
Oof.
I'm
Yeah.
like getting rid of them because now my left calf is wonkier than my right one because it just ripped. And so the moral of that story is yes, please, good footwear for your
Mm-hmm.
health. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
The GenX Shift is brought to you by Life from the Summit, which is my company where I provide one-on-one support for Gen Xers who are navigating any type of transition. Look, I started the podcast because I wanted to support y'all through whatever type of shift you're trying to make in life. And I know from personal experience that it often helps to have individualized one-on-one support to make it through those shifts. I know that I wouldn't have been able to quit my job as an attorney and start my own business if it hadn't been for the support of my own coach. So if you're a Gen Xer who's maybe trying to shift your career, find your purpose in life, figure out what really matters to you, maybe figure out how you're going to save for retirement, how you're going to take care of both your parents and your kids at the same time, whatever shift it is that you're trying to move through, let me know how I could support you. I have programs and packages that I can custom tailor for your needs, and that will allow you to figure out what's really important to you. How can you find your own inner compass to navigate through these transitions? So check out the website at lifefromthesummit.com or send me an email at podcast@lifefromthesummit and let me know that you're interested. Podcast listeners receive special discounts on all of my programs.
Yeah. Yeah. And like just one thing, because you mentioned walking from the subway to your office and changing shoes in between. When you're coming, like when you're changing from heels to sneakers, give your body a little time to adjust before you do that walk to the subway. Like
I'm so glad you said that.
Like, yeah, like actresses do this in the like shuffle around the dressing room in like slippers or whatever. And they just kind of, they're not going for a walk like you do when you go to the subway. They're just like letting their calf muscles kind of relax and de-stress and decompress before they go and walk to the subway. Just like give your body time to adjust.
Okay, so how would you do that?
Yeah.
Like somebody who is like, let's take going to work in the morning.
Yeah.
They put their shoes on and they get up into their office. Don't throw the heels on right away.
It's less, from my understanding, it's less of a problem going sneaker to heel because your calf is more relaxed when you're in the flat and you're scrunching it up into the heel. It's more problematic if your calf is still scrunched up from being in the heel all day, going to a flat and then having to work significantly in that
makes
walk.
sense.
That's my understanding. Yeah. I'm not,
it's been contracted and then you're like
a doctor and like not,
that's just common
advice,
sense though.
Like, exactly. Just give your body a little time to adjust. So even if it's like, if you, wherever you change your shoes, maybe you do a tiny calf massage, just kind of like working out some of the knots. Maybe you swing by like a coffee shop to like just do a tiny little walk and then go to the subway. Maybe it's like sitting on a bench. I'm thinking New York City, like find a little pocket park, just kind of give your body a little time before you do that walk.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because that's really valuable advice. Don't shock your calf muscle by immediately going from super high heel to flat shoe.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have a podcast, or you're gonna you did a podcast?
I do. I had a podcast. Yes, I had a podcast called Talking About Clothes with Holly Chayes, and it was really I started it pre-COVID, but it really like happened through 2020, maybe early 2021. And I'm working on how to bring that back. So that's very exciting.
I support that 100%. I'll make sure that, and your blog article that you mentioned about 84, what was it? 84 ways that.
Yeah, I think it's 84 reasons your clothes don't fit.
I love that. I'm going to put all of that in the show notes. So I'll make sure that everybody can read that because I want to read that. And so let me take you through a quick lightning round here as we kind of wrap up. So I normally, these are all like Gen X oriented questions. So I modified them for you. So what is your fondest childhood memory?
So I have two that are like coming to mind. And the first is the crimper, the hairstylist that like crimped your hair and gave you those like tiny little waves. I'm waiting for that to come back on TikTok.
No,
let's just be real.
Dear God, please don't anybody bring that back. No.
And then there was this toy that was like a fairy, and it had like a stand. This was from when I was like a kid, and it had a stand, and you pulled a string, and the fairy's wings shot out and like spun around and flew through the air. And I saw a meme the other day, something about how many times somebody got injured from one of those.
Flying object with wings spinning around. I can't imagine that was a bad idea.
So those are the two things that come to mind.
I love that. I'm going to have to look that thing up now because I'm fascinated.
Yeah, I don't know what they were
that's
called,
just a
but they were like
projectile.
yeah, exactly. But it was cute.
Your eye poked out by the fairy. Okay. Biggest piece of advice from a millennial to Gen Xers who are going through transition, particularly with their wardrobes.
Give it time. Yeah. I feel like the movie makeover montage like scene really started with Gen X and just kept going. And I think that it gives us such, like, there's so many things that are just no longer problems if you give yourself time.
Right.
Like, it solves so many issues.
This is why I said you were like an old soul, because that is so true. And you can blame us. I think the whole instant makeover thing did start with the Gen X crowd for sure. And it sets such unrealistic expectations, because the lure of it is that we see somebody who is miserable beforehand and afterwards they're happy. I mean, and that's what we want. Like, we want the happiness, we want the feel good, we want the comfort, right? But it doesn't have to come at that kind of almost violent change, rapid fire change, that the more gradual you can make it and lean into gradually that identity shift, the better off you will be for it. So that's really beautiful.
And that doesn't mean it happens slowly. Like, it can happen very fast.
Yeah.
It might not be a weekend.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That seems reasonable, but we don't want that. We are all about now. No. Like the quick hacks, the overnight success. And Jesus, can we please stop with that messaging? There is no such freaking thing. Real change does not happen overnight. And it is all internal. And I think if there's sort of one metaphor for this whole thing, is that it's all about what's internal. It is not about the external. And we're talking deep internal. So it's not even just about mindset. I get kind of angsty about just mindset talk, because I'm like, mindset doesn't get you the whole way. We're talking about deeper stuff. And so you can slap on some nice clothing, but if you still don't feel good, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Yep.
Yeah. And the clothing is a really good way to change your mindset.
Yep.
Because it's a two-way street. So.
Yep. I completely hear that. And I was also thinking of a Friends episode where they all the women put on wedding dresses because they wanted to feel like what it was like to be a bride. And they sat around drinking beer and eating popcorn in wedding dresses because they just felt pretty. So I get that. Like, I do admit, like, I have a lot of really, my cute little summer dresses. I do like to put those on. Like, I feel a little pep in my step. And at the same time, like, I feel pretty damn good in my sweatpants, and I can feel just as sexy in my sweatpants and a t-shirt as I do in a pair of lingerie. Like, that's just me. That's not a lot of people. I get that. But sometimes it can help if you are in a funky mood, like, put on something that looks pretty hot and just see if it can help you shift into, because you're wanting to, again, shift into that identity. And so if that helps you, I think that's awesome. Now I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Is there a Gen X phrase or word that you actually like or use?
I feel like the casual and very adaptable use of the word "like" is a Gen X thing. Is that accurate?
100%.
If so, that might be my favorite.
Yep, totally.
I love how fluid it is, and like you can use it in all the ways.
Yes. I am very proud that word is carried over into many generations, because yes, that is definitely a Gen X word. Okay, if you were a professional sports player, what would be your introduction theme song?
Okay, so the sport I'm most familiar with is soccer, and I don't think they do this.
Yeah, I don't think they
like
do. Imagine that they did.
Yeah, I don't think this is my answer, but I think this would be really funny if somebody came out to the Addams Family theme song.
I like it because it's quirky. The lyrics are the lyrics are just like escaping me right now. But
Yeah. Uh-huh.
yeah, I think that would be awesome, especially
Yeah.
if their
So
last
I
name
don't,
was Adams.
right? I don't know what like my actual answer would be, but I think that would be really funny.
Yeah, I like that. You could kind of like make a walk to it too. It's one of those
Exactly.
songs that lends itself to its
Exactly.
own walk.
I think it would also be really effective at getting in your opponent's head.
I agree. Okay,
So,
what are you most proud of being a millennial?
hmm, yeah, I think that like workplace culture has shifted so much. And I feel like millennials, I think Gen X really started it and millennials really carried it on. And Gen Z is kind of really driving it home. And I think I'm really proud of that. I think that there's a lot of toxicity around workplace culture that we're beginning to change slowly and too slowly. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's very valid. I'm really, as somebody who isn't in the workplace really anymore, I'm actually really glad to see that shift happening because, yeah, I think every generation is sort of waking up to old oppressive ways. And that's not to blame prior generations because every generation, I think, is sort of doing the best that they can do with the information
Yeah.
and messaging and habits that they have at the time, right?
Yeah.
And so if it takes younger generations to keep waking up the older
Mm-hmm.
generations, I'm all for that. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah. So the best place is whowearswho.com. That has links to everything. I'm also sporadically on Instagram at whowearswho. But yeah, that'll get you links to everything that you need to know.
Okay, great. And if
Yeah.
somebody wants to reach out to you to work with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. Whowearswho.com forward
Okay.
slash work together. Yeah.
Work together. All
Yeah.
right. I am so grateful. I just like this conversation is not one
Yeah.
I ever imagined having, and it is so valuable for me. I'm really inspired now to take a pass through my closet gradually, maybe starting with the purses that I don't use that I know somebody else could use.
Yes.
And I really think folks are going to get a lot of wisdom and inspiration from this. So thank you for doing this, for being you, for the work that you're doing in the world. And I wish you so much success.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been an honor. I love what I do. I love this conversation. And I love the conversations that you're having. I think they're really important.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Thanks, Holly.
Thank you.
Wasn't that conversation fun and different and inspiring and encouraging you to look at your personal style as something deeper than even just what your clothing is? It's about what your clothing really represents about you. I found it so freeing to think about being able to clean out my closet in a way that didn't force me to make yes or no decisions, that I could hold on and embrace some of the maybes, that I could make kind of a scrapbook out of some of the more sentimental things that I have, and to really embrace what personal style means for me. It's not about what the rest of the world thinks because you're not going to change other people's minds. It's about what you feel good in, what you want to portray before you even say a word. So I hope this conversation landed for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your reactions, your reflections about this conversation. So please make sure to leave a comment wherever you're listening and to like, rate, and review the podcast. And until next time, stay gold, Gen Xers.